Mr. Mayor, I want to ask you about another one before moving on to other witnesses. In a Facebook post that you put up in November of 2023, you praised the actions of Houthi rebels in hijacking and kidnapping the crew of the cargo ship, the Galaxy Leader, and noted, quote, "The kidnapped ship doesn't fly the Israeli flag, but it's painted completely with it, blue and white colors only," close quote. Do you continue to support actions by the Houthis, who are a U.S. designated foreign terrorist organization, in kidnapping innocent merchant sailors and disrupting shipping in the Red Sea?
Thank you, Senator, for that important question. You know, if you go over my social media since 2011, you would know how strong opponent and how much I disagree with the Houthi, to the point where I cannot travel to Yemen. I'm in their blacklist. I mean, it's so.
So are you denying that you posted a Facebook post celebrating the kidnapping by the Houthis of the particular crew of this ship, the Galaxy Leader?
I don't think it's a celebration. This is assumptions that's making. I disagree with attacking the ships and disrupting.
But are you denying that you posted what I just read to you?
I think there was a post, but it seems like it's taken out of context. Maybe I commented on.
Well, I'll share it with the colleagues before we take up your nomination in committee. Mr. Bozell, I also just want to echo what Senator Murphy said. It is an easy question. It's a layup when you're asked the question of should our refugee programs be race-based. Our Constitution in the 14th Amendment says all persons, not all citizens, all persons in this country are entitled to equal protection of the laws. You'll take an oath. You'll take an oath to support that Constitution should you be confirmed. It's not a hard question, and your unwillingness to answer it is very troubling. I want to ask you this. Are you aware of the Freedom Plus Party in South African politics?
No, Senator.
Okay, I'll tell you, the Freedom Plus Party is an Afrikaner political party that has the most representation of Afrikaners in the South African parliament, and that is part of the national unity government. It was a party that used to be in opposition, but since 2024 has been part of the national unity government. The Afrikaners that President Trump believes are being persecuted are actually represented by a party that made the decision to join the national unity government, and I think that's something you should pay some attention to. Ms. Namdar, I want to return to the questions that were being asked by Senator Rosen about visas. Really, really important work. During a hearing here on July 16, Michael Regas, who's the Deputy Secretary for Management and Resources, was asked a number of questions about how RIFs and firings were affecting the State Department, and in particular were affecting the issue of consular affairs and visa issues. We asked, based on these RIFs, who would absorb these functions. You would agree with me that passport and visa fraud prevention is very important to our national security, correct?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Of course, all of our visa and passport services are important to national security.
And do you know, as you are nominated for this position, who is going to absorb the functions that have been made more complicated by the significant rifts within the visa and consular area?
Thank you for the question, Senator. As you know, I'm not yet confirmed, so I'm not privy to the information that you're citing. I'm very happy to look into it when and if I'm lucky enough to be confirmed.
Let me ask you another question. My staff has heard informally, I have a lot of State Department folks that live in Virginia, so we get a lot of stuff coming in over the transom, that the State Department is breaking a longstanding practice and no longer evaluating dual citizens for wrongful detention determinations under the Levinson Act. Do you know what the Levinson Act is?
I'm not familiar, sir, but I haven't heard anything about what you've just stated.
The Levinson Act was signed into law in late 2020, and it provides a framework for the Secretary of State to review cases to make a wrongful detention determination for U.S. nationals. And the Act does not allow for a distinction between a U.S. national and a U.S. national who has dual citizenship. Have you heard anything about the State Department making a determination to no longer pursue wrongful detention cases for U.S. nationals who also have dual citizenship in other nations?
Thank you for the question. I am not familiar with what you've cited. I'm happy to look into it when and if confirmed.
If confirmed, will you ensure that the United States follows the Levinson Act?
If confirmed, I will ensure that I try to comply with all laws.
And you will work to ensure that the administration does not discriminate against U.S. nationals who also have dual citizenship?
I don't believe this administration would discriminate against anybody, and I will work to uphold all laws.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. I'm looking forward to this opportunity to talk. I want to return to the incident that you referenced a minute ago that occurred in Monterey, California in October 2017. At that time, you were still married to your second wife, correct?
I believe so.
And you had just fathered a child by a woman who would later become your third wife, correct?
Senator, I was falsely charged, fully investigated, and completely cleared.
So you think you were completely cleared because you committed no crime. That's your definition of cleared? You had just fathered a child 2 months before by a woman that was not your wife. I am shocked that you would stand here and say you're completely cleared. Can you so casually cheat on a second wife and cheat on the mother of a child that had been born 2 months before, and you tell us you are completely cleared? How is that a complete clear?
Senator, her child's name is Gwendolyn Hope Hegseth, and she's a child of God, and she's 7 years old.
And she was, and you cheated on the mother of that child less than 2 months after that daughter was born, didn't you?
Those were false charges.
Well,
it was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared. And I am so grateful for the marriage I have to this amazing woman behind me.
You've admitted that you had sex at that hotel in October 2017. You said it was consensual, isn't that correct?
Anything?
You've admitted that it was consensual, and you were still married, and you just had a child by another woman.
Again,
how do you explain your judgment?
Completely false charges against me.
You
fully investigated, and I was completely clear.
You have admitted that you had sex while you were married to wife 2 after you just had fathered a child by wife 3. You've admitted that. Now, if it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
It was a false claim then and a false claim now.
If it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
That was a false claim.
So you
talking about a hypothetical.
So you can't tell me whether someone who has committed a sexual assault is disqualified from being Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I know in my instance, and I'm talking about my instance only, it was a false claim.
But you acknowledge,
investigated.
That you cheated on your wife and that you cheated on the woman by whom you had just fathered a child. You have admitted that.
I will allow your words to speak for themselves.
You're not retracting that today. That's good. I assume that in each of your weddings, you've pledged to be faithful to your wife. You've taken an oath to do that, haven't you?
Senator, as I've acknowledged to everyone in this committee, not a perfect person, not claiming to be.
But no, I just asked a simple question. You've taken an oath like you would take an oath to be Secretary of Defense in all of your weddings to be faithful to your wife. Is that correct?
I have failed in things in my life, and thankfully I'm redeemed by my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
In finalizing divorces from your first and second wives, were there non-disclosure agreements in connection with those divorces?
Senator, not that I'm aware of.
If there were, would you agree to release those first and second wives from any confidentiality agreement?
Senator, it's not something I'm aware of.
But if there were, you would agree to release them from a confidentiality agreement?
Senator, that's not my responsibility.
Did you ever engage in any acts of physical violence against any of your wives?
Senator, absolutely not.
But you would agree with me that if someone had committed physical violence against a spouse, that would be disqualifying to serve as Secretary of Defense, correct?
Senator, absolutely not have I ever done that.
You would agree that that would be a disqualifying offense, would you not?
Senator, you're talking about a hypothetical.
I don't think it's a hypothetical. Violence against spouses occurs every day. And if you as a leader are not capable of saying that physical violence against a spouse should be a disqualifying fact for being Secretary of the most powerful nation in the world, you're demonstrating an astonishing lack of judgment. The incident in Monterey led to a criminal charge, a criminal investigation, a private settlement, and a cash payment to the woman who filed the complaint. And there was also a non-disclosure agreement, correct?
It was a confidential settlement agreement off of a nuisance lawsuit.
Right. During an interview, you claimed that you settled the matter because you were worried that if it became public, it might hurt your career. Do you maintain that you were blackmailed?
Senator, I maintain that false claims were made against me. And ultimately,
Your attorney
those
used
false
the
claims,
phrase,
I have the opportunity to attest my innocence in those false claims.
But you didn't reveal any of this to President Trump or the transition team as they were considering you to be nominated for Secretary of Defense. You didn't reveal the action. You didn't reveal the criminal complaint. You didn't reveal the criminal investigation. You didn't reveal the settlement. You didn't reveal the cash payment. Why didn't you inform the commander-in-chief and the transition team of this very relevant event?
Senator, I've appreciated every part of the process with the transition team. They have been open and honest with me. We've had great conversations between the two of us, and I appreciate the opportunity that President-elect Trump has given me.
You chose not to reveal this, right? Because you knew it would hurt your chances. So you chose not to reveal this really important thing to the commander-in-chief and the transition team because you were worried about your chances rather than trying to be candid with the future president of the United States. Are there any other important facts that you chose not to reveal to the president-elect and his team as they were considering you to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I sit here before you an open book, as everyone who's watched this process.
With multiple non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements tying the hands of many people who would like to comment to us. Much has been made of your workplace behavior as a leader of nonprofit veterans organizations and as a Fox News contributor. Were you fired from either of the leadership positions with the nonprofits?
I was the leader. I was the CEO of Concerned Veterans for America and the executive director of Vets for Freedom.
Were you fired from either
and I
of
was
them?
never fired from a veterans organization.
Do you have non-disclosure agreements with either of those organizations?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
Many of your work colleagues have said that you show up for work under the influence of alcohol or drunk. I know you've denied that, but you would agree with me, right, that if that was the case, that would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense.
Senator, those are all anonymous false claims, and the totality
they're not anonymous.
The letters on the record here.
They're not anonymous.
On the record, people
We've seen records with names
Vets
attached
for Freedom,
to them.
Concerned Vets for America, and Fox News
One of your colleagues
working
said,
hard every day on behalf of
One of your
mission.
colleagues said that you got drunk at an event at a bar and chanted, "Kill all Muslims." Another colleague, not anonymous, we have this, said that you took coworkers to a strip club. You were drunk, you tried to dance with strippers, you had to be held off the stage, and one of your employees in that event filed a sexual harassment charge as a result of it. Now, I know you denied these things, but isn't that the kind of behavior that, if true, would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, anonymous false charges.
They're not anonymous. And I'll just conclude and say this to the chairman. You claim that this was all anonymous. We have seen records with names attached to all of these, including the name of your own mother. So don't make this into some anonymous press thing. We have seen multiple names of colleagues consistently throughout your career that have talked about your abusive actions,
Chairman,
attitudes,
I think he's
words,
over
and
his time.
statements
He's
to
way
women.
over his time.
I now yield.
And thank you very much. I now ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a family court order concerning the appointment of parenting time between Mr. Hegseth and Mrs. Samantha Hegseth. It states that there were no claims of domestic abuse or probable evidence of abuse in the relationship. Without objection, that will be added to the record.
Senator McCormick. Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations, Representative Stefanik, for the nomination. I really appreciated the meeting that we had in our office. You and I have some political differences, of course, but we talked that day about items on which we agree. We had some on which we disagreed, and we had a couple of others where you said your position is one that President Trump doesn't agree with. And I like that candor, and I like the fact that we had a good exchange. I'm grappling with that and some of the partisan comments you've made in the past. An article that I'd like to put in the record, National Public Radio article, How the Replacement Theory Went Mainstream on the Political Right from May of 2022. On Monday morning, Stefanik tweeted, Democrats desperately want wide open borders and mass amnesty for illegals, allowing them to vote. I'd like to put that in the record.
Without objection, it will be included.
Now, that was a campaign tweet, and I can separate campaign rhetoric from governing rhetoric. I don't view things like that as disqualifying. They do raise questions. But at least we had a good meeting. We talked about important issues and shared ideas. I'm going to say something here that I wish I could have said at an Armed Services Committee hearing, but we had it in closed session. All of the Trump nominees who come before the committees on which I sit have agreed to meet with me, save one. The Secretary of Defense nominee, Pete Hegseth. He's written that he thinks Democrats are evil. He's written that he thinks Democrats are the adversary. And he refused to meet with any Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, save the chairman. Save the chairman. Yesterday, in a closed hearing, we were asked to forward his nomination to the floor, even though it had not been pending to the committee for sufficient time. My colleagues asked, hey, why would we give a waiver to someone who wouldn't even agree to meet with us? That nominee would disrespect Democrats, okay, that's fine. But I didn't think my committee colleagues on the Armed Services Committee would have disrespected us. And I'll just say to all of my Republican colleagues here, if there is ever a nominee by any president who refuses to come meet with you when you're on the committee of jurisdiction overseeing that nominee, I will publicly raise hell on your behalf. Nominees should meet with the committees, just as Representative Stefanik did. And Representative Stefanik, while I have a question about some of the campaign rhetoric, I'm not going to ask you about it because that's in the past. I do appreciate the fact that you were courteous, informed, civil, and candid in the meeting with me. I told you I had two concerns, engagement and the Western Hemisphere. You've convinced me that you were nominated for this position not to disengage, but to engage, and I appreciate that. In fact, you wanted this position, and you wouldn't have wanted it otherwise, and that's great. On the Western Hemisphere, you're going to be working with the Secretary of State we approved unanimously yesterday, our colleague, Senator Rubio. Senator Rubio talked at some length about a number of topics on the Americas the other day, and I want to ask you about one that is particularly challenging right now, and that's Haiti. The situation in Haiti is a disaster. You know that. I mean, you've been on these committees overseeing American national security, and you know that issues like Haiti create immigration challenges and all kinds of other challenges that are bad on the humanitarian front and can cause problems for allies like the Dominican Republic and cause problems for us. We now have a security operation in Haiti being led by Kenyans with the assistance of other nations, with the financial support and assistance of the United States. Senator Rubio talked at some length here on last week about how important it was that we stay engaged on that. I'd like to know kind of what your thought would be, should you be confirmed at the UN, for what the U.S. can do to try to help Haitians find a next chapter that is a peaceful one.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Kaine. Appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you. I know we serve on the National Endowment for Democracy together, and there's been significant bipartisan results delivered through that program funded by Congress. I wanted to just point out, I stand strongly for border security. And that was what the tweet you referenced was related to. And I would point out that in the sector that I represent, the Swanton sector, there was a Border Patrol officer killed in the last 24 hours.
Are there any Democratic senators that you think are for open border and mass amnesty for illegal undocumented
Well,
people?
I would point out that Democratic think tanks and rhetorics have talked about...
I'm asking about senators. Any Democratic senators you would level that charge against?
I think there are Democrat senators who have supported open borders. What I was doing is clarifying when you pointed out a headline from an article.
Not a headline, a quote of yours.
What the which was related to border security, and we just had an overwhelming popular vote for President Trump, where border security was top of the mind.
Well,
I think it's important to know, I do stand by my rhetoric standing up for strong borders, and the American people overwhelmingly support that. Related to your question related to Haiti.
My time is over, so let me just conclude and say this. When I've been on this committee and in the Senate, I was part of a bipartisan deal that put $46 billion of border security on the table that the House Republican majority killed, and another deal that put $25 billion of border security on the table in 2018 that President Trump killed. And I was just part of a bipartisan deal in the last year that was significant about bipartisan border security on the border that President Trump killed. The notion that Democratic senators are for open borders and allowing illegal aliens to vote is a fantasy. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you. But now I have questions about if you'd fall for a fantasy. I'm going to have that to ponder that, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
I do want to address that, Chairman Rich, if you give me the latitude to do so. We are very proud that on the House side, we passed H.R. 2, the most significant border security package that Chuck Schumer failed to bring up in the Senate. That would return to the effective policies of President Trump. And again, the American people voted loudly and clearly when it came to securing our borders and the failures of the past 4 years. I'm not going to apologize for my commitment to securing the border when I represent a significant part of the U.S. A major sector, the Swanton sector, where we've had a skyrocketing of illegals crossing there. On the issue of Haiti, which I think is important, and it is a bipartisan concern, obviously it's a humanitarian significant challenge in our hemisphere. Working with Secretary Rubio, we need to have a strategy. I'm deeply concerned. It is very complex. There is no simple solution. And that is an area where we need to continue to have discussions with the committees of oversight. I'm very concerned on the Intelligence Committee briefings I've received about the crisis in Haiti. So I look to work with Secretary Rubio to support his commitment to the Western Hemisphere, specifically the complexities of the humanitarian challenges within Haiti.
So, Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on the nomination, Mr. Vogt. I want to go back to the comment that Senator Warner read to you. There's 140,000 federal employees in Virginia. And you gave a speech that got a lot of attention when you said, we want bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. Now, I pay attention to the way people say things because there's a million ways you can make a point. And the way you choose to make a point tells you something about the person. There's a wonderful, since I had an Old Testament reference over there, I'll go to a New Testament one, Luke 6:45. From the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. We want people to be traumatized. We want people to be traumatized. I've heard a million people in this room give speeches about we want to cut the budget, we want to reduce federal spending, want to deal with the deficit, but I haven't heard anybody give a gleeful speech about traumatizing the federal workforce. You don't want federal air traffic controllers going to the airport traumatized, do you, Mr. Vogt?
No, Senator.
You don't want the people inspecting our food, our medicine, our infant formula as federal, you don't want them to go to work traumatized, do you?
No, Senator.
You don't want the people interdicting drugs at the border. You don't want them going to work traumatized, do you?
No, Senator.
And you don't want people who are working for you at the OMB, who many people would think, well, they're in the White House, they must be, you don't want them traumatized, do you?
No, Senator. Thank you for expanding on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I felt like I had to, because I got 140,000 people, and most of them have families. And they're trying to do a good job. Was your comment about people being traumatized just focused on the federal workforce, or was it more broadly about state employees and local government employees too?
Senator, it was about the weaponized bureaucracy that unfortunately—
I'm going to get to weaponized in a minute, but you were talking about the federal workforce.
I was talking about the bureaucracy that I experienced and that have—
at the federal level.
At the federal level.
You were not talking about state
I can't
employees.
speak. I have no experience with the state.
You were not talking about local employees?
Was not.
Your mother was a public school teacher, correct?
Yes, Senator.
So you were talking about you want the federal workforce to be traumatized.
Bureaucracies.
I like a lot of presidents. I'm a Lincoln fan. Are you a Lincoln fan?
Yes, Senator.
Lincoln spoke to a nation at war, and he said, with malice towards none and charity towards all. And he was saying that to the North and the South. He didn't say, we want you to be traumatized. He was a bridge builder and a unifier, and that's what public servants should be. They shouldn't gleefully be wishing trauma on people who are trying to serve their fellow man. I want to get to woke and weaponized. You were the president of the Center for Renewing America, and the think tank produced a 2023 budget proposal calling a commitment to end woke and weaponized government. Do you remember that?
Yes, Senator.
And that's the correct title?
Yes, Senator.
It's 104 pages of details to end woke and weaponized government. And it proposes deep cuts to the SNAP program. Is providing nutrition assistance to low-income kids woke and weaponized?
Senator, I'm not here to talk about the budget that the center put out. I'm here on behalf of the president.
Yeah, but you just said you did that. I want to know what's woke and weaponized about providing food assistance to low-income kids.
Well, again, I'm not here on behalf of my senator, on behalf of the president.
I know
being
that,
his nominee.
but this is your work product. I mean, you can say it's not woke and weaponized, or you can tell me why it's woke and weaponized. I don't think SNAP programs or benefits for kids are woke and weaponized. You agree with me?
When we refer to the federal government being weaponized, we're referring to bureaucracies that
Okay, so you're
contain-
not you didn't include SNAP. You proposed to cut SNAP, but you're not saying it's woke and weaponized.
Again, I am not going to answer questions about the Center for Renewing
You
America's
propose
products.
deep cuts to Pell Grants. Is helping kids pay for college and helping their families, is that woke and weaponized?
Again, I'm not here to defend the Center for Renewing America's
I get it
budget.
that you're not here to defend that work product, and I can understand why. You propose deep cuts to Medicaid for millions of low-income families. Why is that woke and weaponized? You propose undermining health insurance. Why is that woke and weaponized? Eliminating tenant-based rental assistance. Why is that woke and weaponized? Eliminating the low-income housing energy assistance program. This was all in your document about ending woke and weaponized government. Okay, let's see. We want to traumatize federal employees, and then we want to take all these programs that help everyday people who are struggling and cut them because they're woke and weaponized. Those are your words, not mine. From the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. I yield back.
You, Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on the nomination, Mr. Vogt. I want to go back to the comment that Senator Warner read to you. There's 140,000 federal employees in Virginia. And you gave a speech that got a lot of attention when you said, we want bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. Now, I pay attention to the way people say things because there's a million ways you can make a point. And the way you choose to make a point tells you something about the person. There's a wonderful, since I had an Old Testament reference over there, I'll go to a New Testament one, Luke 6:45. From the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. We want people to be traumatized. We want people to be traumatized. I've heard a million people in this room give speeches about we want to cut the budget, we want to reduce federal spending, we want to deal with the deficit, but I haven't heard anybody give a gleeful speech about traumatizing the federal workforce. You don't want federal air traffic controllers going to the airport traumatized, do you, Mr. Vogt?
No, Senator.
You don't want the people inspecting our food, our medicine, our infant formula as federal. You don't want them to go to work traumatized, do you?
No, Senator.
You don't
nor
want the
have I said
people
that.
interdicting drugs at the border. You don't want them going to work traumatized, do you?
No, Senator.
And you don't want people who are working for you at the OMB, who many people would think, well, they're in the White House, they must be. You don't want them traumatized, do you?
No, Senator. Thank you for expanding on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I felt like I had to, because I got 140,000 people, and most of them have families, and they're trying to do a good job. Was your comment about people being traumatized just focused on the federal workforce, or was it more broadly about state employees and local government employees too?
Senator, it was about the weaponized bureaucracy that unfortunately—
I'm going to get to weaponized in a minute, but you were talking about the federal workforce.
I was talking about the bureaucracy that I experienced and that have—
at the federal level.
At the federal level.
You were not talking about state
I can't
employees.
speak. I have no experience with the state.
You were not talking about local employees?
Was not.
Your mother was a public school teacher, correct?
Yes, Senator.
So you were talking about you want the federal workforce to be traumatized.
Bureaucracies.
I like a lot of presidents. I'm a Lincoln fan. Are you a Lincoln fan?
Yes, Senator.
Lincoln spoke to a nation at war, and he said, with malice towards none and charity towards all. And he was saying that to the North and the South. He didn't say, we want you to be traumatized. He was a bridge builder and a unifier, and that's what public servants should be. They shouldn't gleefully be wishing trauma on people who are trying to serve their fellow man. I want to get to woke and weaponized. You were the president of the Center for Renewing America, and the think tank produced a 2023 budget proposal calling a commitment to end woke and weaponized government. Do you remember that?
Yes, Senator.
And that's the correct title?
Yes, Senator.
It's 104 pages of details to end woke and weaponized government. And it proposes deep cuts to the SNAP program. Is providing nutrition assistance to low-income kids woke and weaponized?
Senator, I'm not here to talk about the budget that the center put out. I'm here on behalf
Yeah,
of the
but
president.
you just said you did that. I want to know what's woke and weaponized about providing food assistance to low-income kids.
Well, again, I'm not here on behalf of my center, on behalf of the president.
I know that, but this is your work product. I mean, you can say it's not woke and weaponized, or you can tell me why it's woke and weaponized. I don't think SNAP programs or benefits for kids are woke and weaponized. You agree with me?
When we refer to the federal government being weaponized, we're referring to bureaucracies that
Okay, so you're
contain-
not you didn't include SNAP. You proposed to cut SNAP, but you're not saying it's woke and weaponized.
Again, I am not going to answer questions about the Center for Renewing
You
America's
propose
products.
deep cuts to Pell Grants. Is helping kids pay for college and helping their families, is that woke and weaponized?
Again, I'm not here to defend the Center for Renewing America's
I get it
budget.
that you're not here to defend that work product, and I can understand why. You propose deep cuts to Medicaid for millions of low-income families. Why is that woke and weaponized? You propose undermining health insurance. Why is that woke and weaponized? Eliminating tenant-based rental assistance. Why is that woke and weaponized? Eliminating the low-income housing energy assistance program. This was all in your document about ending woke and weaponized government. Okay, let's see. We want to traumatize federal employees, and then we want to take all these programs that help everyday people who are struggling and cut them because they're woke and weaponized. Those are your words, not mine. From the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. I yield back.
You, Senator.
Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on your nomination, Mr. Kennedy. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for starting off today acknowledging the pain felt by people in this region from this horrible air tragedy last night. Senator Marshall and Senator Moran, a lot of folks from Kansas, a lot of folks from Virginia, D.C., Maryland, but also when that passenger list comes out and when the 3 soldiers' names are revealed, every office here is going to have some connection to them because you have your staffs who live here, and we kind of dread seeing that list of names. I drove to the airport at 6:30 this morning and went across the bridge over the Potomac and saw the operation, the recovery operation, kind of underway in daylight hours. And I thought about the last big aviation disaster in Richmond when on 9/11 a plane slammed into the Pentagon. And Virginia got hurt very bad that day, and so did the nation. Just a couple of months ago, you posted this on your X account. On 9/11, it's hard to tell what is conspiracy theory and what isn't. I'd like to introduce that for the record, Mr. Chair. We take that kind of stuff pretty personally. Virginians know what happened on 9/11. We don't need folks giving oxygen to conspiracy theories about 9/11. Now, one thing I noticed about this post is it was in July of 2024. It was 23 years after 9/11. You had a lot going on in your life. You were running for president then. What made you decide in the midst of everything going on in this country, in this world in July of 2024 in your own candidacy for president, that now was the time to say it's hard to tell what is conspiracy and what isn't about 9/11? What was so important about making this point in July of 2024?
Senator, the dramatic drop in trust in our government, and this is particularly one of the templates of that is what happened at CDC.
Yeah, no, I want to move aside from that. Because you say, you go on to say, I won't take sides. As president, I won't take sides on 9/11. Wow. I won't take sides on 9/11. Let me ask you this. As a general matter, do you find it hard to tell what is a conspiracy theory and what isn't? Is that kind of a general deficit that you find in your own analytical abilities?
My father told me when I was 13 years old, he said, people in authority lie, and that the job of a citizen in every democracy is to
you're an
maintain
authority.
a fierce skepticism
Okay, I get
of
it.
government authority.
And you're an authority, but you wouldn't take sides on 9/11, and you're admitting, I have
I
a
haven't
hard time
investigated
telling what is a
Senator.
conspiracy theory and what isn't.
Senator, I haven't investigated it. If the things that I investigate, I take sides on, people are allowed to hold that opinion. I'm not going to tell them they're crazy for holding that opinion. I'm going to say, what is your evidence? And if I hear the evidence, I'm going to say, that doesn't make any sense.
So you won't take sides on 9/11. Wow. Senator Murray asked you some questions about Gardasil, and this is a vaccine that's manufactured in Virginia. There's other HPV vaccines. I'm going to enter into the record a whole series of studies from many, many nations that talk about the dramatic positive effect of Gardasil. Could I introduce those into the record, Mr. Chair?
Without objection.
And those studies are on trial
let me ask
right
a question.
now.
Let me ask a question. These are studies from Scotland, Sweden, the UK, Australia, the United States, multiple studies. And then I'm going to introduce in the record, I guess it's a blog post of yours. The verdict is now inescapable. Gardasil is killing girls. And I'd like to introduce that into the record as well.
Without objection.
You have a pretty significant financial interest in litigation against Gardasil. You have received contingency fees and payments for referring people to lawyers suing the manufacturer. And in your ethics vetting...
I've never received any money from any Gardasil or any other vaccine lawsuit.
Let me read a quote. This is your words. In your ethics vetting for this nomination, you said, quote, "Pursuant to the referral agreement, I'm entitled to receive 10% of fees awarded in contingency cases referred to the firm." How can folks who need to have confidence in federal vaccine programs trust you to be independent and science-based when you stand to gain significant funding if lawsuits against vaccine manufacturers are successful?
I have given away all of my rights to any fees in that lawsuit.
I yield back questions to the nominee. I'm still huffing and puffing from racing from another meeting, but I really appreciated the meeting that we had in my office. I think you have a sort of a non-traditional skill set to bring to this nomination, but for reasons I may get into in my questions and that we discussed in the office, I think some non-traditional skills are sort of necessary right now in some of the matters you discussed in your opening statement. Before I ask you a question, I just want to tell my colleagues, I had a whirlwind weekend. We were on the floor till 5 a.m. Friday on the reconciliation bill, and then I flew to Finland, and I just spent the weekend with the Virginia Army Guard and the Karelia Brigade, which is one of the 3 brigades of the Finnish Army, doing a joint training exercise in snow-covered birch forests in southern Finland. And it was a fascinating 48 hours on the ground with a great NATO ally. I met with the president, the foreign minister, the permanent defense secretary, the shipbuilding industry. And Finland's a great ally and a great friend, and it's important to hear what your friends say. I came back with some thoughts. We got to remember 1938. A desire on behalf of the Prime Minister of England to declare peace in our time. He was able to achieve it and declare peace in our time, but it was a disaster because the peace of appeasing a bully was a catastrophe. In 1975 in Helsinki, 50 years ago this summer, we entered into the Helsinki Accords to create stability in Europe, and the then Soviet Union pledged to respect the sovereign integrity of every other nation. In fact, all the signatories to the Accords did. That's worthy of celebration after 50 years and revitalizing. And in 1995, we created the OSCE, coming out of the Helsinki Accords to essentially do the same thing. 5 years ago this week, President Trump negotiated a deal with the Taliban, leaving the government of Afghanistan out of the deal. And we were able to declare peace in our time, but the decision to omit Afghan participation in that peace deal turned into a catastrophe. And the Inspector General that did the after assessment after August of 2021 indicated that cutting the Afghans out led to such a feeling of abandonment that that was one of the critical factors in that going wrong. Even if you forget all the history, just remember what your parents told you when you were going to school the first time you complained about a bully. They said you got to stand up to a bully or a bully will keep bullying you and others. And so yesterday in the meetings in Helsinki, it was the 3rd anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And a resolution was offered at the UN General Assembly containing this phrase: the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation has persisted for 3 years. That phrase, saying that it was an invasion by the Russian Federation, led the United States of America to vote no. The resolution failed. The U.S. voted no along with Russia, Nicaragua, North Korea. It was sobering to be in Helsinki with this new NATO ally who joined NATO and is exercising with Virginia troops, and have the U.S. unwilling to vote for something because it said, place the blame for the invasion on the Russian Federation. We have a president who won't clearly say it. We have a Secretary of Defense who won't clearly say it. We have too many people who won't speak the truth. This was a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And at the highest levels of our government right now, we have folks who won't speak the truth, and they'll stand with Russia and Nicaragua and North Korea rather than standing with allies. It is important that we not let these things just pass by unremarked upon. This is the first armed services hearing we've had since the 3rd anniversary, and I just felt like I wanted to put it on the record. Would you agree with me? Mr. Feinberg, you talked about the competition with China and what it's going to take for us to succeed. Would you agree with me that in that competition, a robust network of allies is one of the great assets that the United States has, and we should work to maintain it?
Yes, I think our allies are very important, but our relationships with them need to be fair to America and in our interests.
I would never suggest otherwise.
Of course, Senator. And also, as deputy, execution would be my job, and making diplomatic policy and relationship decisions would be more of the job of the Secretary and, of course, the President.
I really will want your help, and we talked at length about shipbuilding. We are putting more money in year after year, and then let's put more money in is not getting us the result that we need. And I think you have a skill set, again, that's a little bit non-traditional, but we're not going to be able to solve our production woes just by this committee voting for greater appropriations. If we don't have some change makers, we're not going to get to where we need to get, and I look forward to continuing that discussion. With that, Mr. President, I yield. I'd like to ask that the UN General Assembly resolution that I referred to, that the U.S. voted against and caused it to fail, I'd like to ask that it be entered into the record.
Reserving the right to object, I was told the resolution was adopted by the General Assembly.
There was a resolution adopted. The one that I read that put the onus on Russia was defeated. One that removed it, the Security Council did approve it, although the U.S. abstained.
Let's, if it's all right, let's put both of them in the record for clarity.
No worries.
Thank you very much. Take a deep breath. Perhaps Senator Scott would like to pass. Take a deep breath. Perhaps Senator Scott would like to pass. Senator Mullen.
Now, that's a gentleman there. Thank you, sir.
Who are you speaking of? I'm just kidding.
Both.
Yeah.
I want to take some time here because it wasn't where I was planning to go, but I just can't allow my colleagues on the other side to just spew 100% mistruths constantly and then play into the fear of the American people. And I'm just going to start, first of all, with our national security issues. National security issue one is our national debt. And our national debt is now costing us more to just pay interest than we spend on our military. That's a huge national security risk. And so at what point do we start making cuts? And people want to start talking about cutting 5,400 jobs out of the DOD as a whole when they have 950,000 employees, and we're talking about less than 0.5% of the workforce. Where do we start cutting? We're spending trillions of dollars with agencies that are not unfunded, and you're going to tell me we don't have the ability to cut some employees when underneath the Biden administration it was bloated and there's not room to cut? When a company is going underwater, you do have to take a look at the workforce. I don't want to suggest that our country is going underwater, but if we continue this path, we will. And I commend President Trump and those that he has put in place to actually make hard cuts. Making cuts are difficult. It's tough. But when are we supposed to start if we don't start now? The previous administration wasn't willing to do that. And then, as the senator that just asked questions wanted to bring up the Afghanistan withdrawal, brother, that's very, very close to me. That hits home. And you're going to lay the withdrawal on President Trump and say it was his fault? The disastrous withdrawal came 100% from the Biden administration, and American lives were left behind and are still dying because of it. And Americans' lives were lost during the withdrawal. And you're going to sit there with a straight face and try to say that it was President Trump's fault? When the Biden administration, and all of us know this because we were briefed on this, that the Biden administration threw out the entire withdrawal plan that the Trump administration had and decided to go their own way. And man, wasn't that great. And then we're going to start talking about President Trump not calling a bully out like Putin. Do we forget what happened in 2017 when Trump 100% told Russia to stay out of Syria, not to be involved, especially with the bombing of Assad's own people? And when they did, President Trump within 30 minutes took out the airfield that they operated out of, destroyed it, and then took back the airspace. And we had the airspace in Syria all the way up until Biden took office and we gave it back to Putin. Or stand up to a bully. Do we want to go back to Israel and Hamas and discuss the way the Biden administration handled that? And the way they refused to call Hamas a terrorist organization and the Houthis a terrorist organization and Iran a terrorist organization? And you're going to sit there with a straight face and actually say that about President Trump? Are you joking me? Are we serious saying that President Trump isn't willing to stand up to a bully when underneath his administration was the only time that Russia didn't advance into Ukraine? Because he did underneath Obama when they took Crimea, and they did underneath Biden because they didn't respect him because of the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and every expert will tell you that. So where is it that we're coming up with this other than just plain fear? All I want to do is just stroke fear into the American people and try to divide something between us and the president. Because the president is bringing back hostages. He also brought back a hostage that Biden left behind, and he didn't give up one thing to Russia, including a guy that was highly, highly considered a threat to the world. What was his name? Anybody? What was his nickname? Soleimani. No, not Soleimani. Dr. Death that we decided to trade for. And I'm sure you guys thought that was a good trade. Guys, give me a break. We're trying to advance America's agenda and do what's best for this country, and the American people agree with the direction we're going. So, sir, sorry about going on a rant here because I actually did want to get into your business and the direction that you can take our defense industry, but that couldn't go without answered. And so you and I have already had a conversation. We'll continue the conversation. I look forward to working with you. With that,
Thank you.
I yield
Thank
back
you,
to
Senator Mullen. Senator Warren.
So, Mr. Feinberg, you've been
Find a better or more willing partner than Senator Lee. He is outstanding in that regard.
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kaine.
Thank you. Simple question for each of you. Who instigated the current war in Gaza?
I would say Hamas did by...
Mr. Regas?
I would agree with my colleague.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yeah, October 7th was an invasion by Hamas.
So you didn't have any problem saying who instigated the war in Gaza, but none of you would be candid about who instigated the war in Ukraine. And what you said is the reason, and I'm going to be fair to Mr. Regas, I didn't hear you be equivocal about that. I heard Mr. Whitaker and Mr. Landau. What you said is there's sensitive and delicate negotiations going on right now, and I'm not here to label. There's a sensitive and delicate negotiation going on between Israel, Gaza, and other parties right now about extending a ceasefire, and it's really important to Israel, and it's really important to hostage families, and it's really important to Palestinians. It's really important in the Red Sea because the Houthis have stopped firing into the Red Sea during the ceasefire, and if we extend it, we have reason to believe that the Houthis will continue to not fire at U.S. ships. So I'm noticing this. Senator Shaheen and I were just at a hearing with the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Mr. Bridge Colby, and he said the same thing. He was asked who was responsible for the war in Ukraine, who instigated it. Well, there's a sensitive, delicate negotiation. I don't really want to opine about who instigated it. So I asked him who instigated the war in Gaza, and he said it was Hamas. We got to be willing to tell the truth. And I know answering the question truthfully might make a superior uncomfortable, but Americans deserve the truth. And if we're voting to confirm people for really critical positions, and you've all served in important positions, and you're all nominated for really important positions, we've got to have a sense that you're going to be truthful. And that the truthful nature of your comments may or may not be listened to, your advice may or may not be followed, but what you owe to your commander-in-chief, what you owe to the country, what you owe to the oath you take, is to be truthful. And I just can't help but notice it was so easy to answer the question about who instigated the war in Gaza, and so difficult for just folks to be plain and answer the question about who instigated the war in Ukraine. Mr. Egas, I have a question for you about Schedule F, and my colleague, Senator Van Hollen, has already mentioned it. And Schedule F was the first Trump term proposal. It's now Schedule PC, and you indicated there's some similarities, there's some differences. You were part of both OPM and the OMB during the first Trump term, and the guidance in that agency suggested there was a desire to reclassify 80% of employees in those agencies from traditional political service to Schedule F. Do you have a sense of what the likely percentage reclassification would be at the Department of State under Trump administration term 2?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And again, I enjoyed our meeting. I think you were the first senator I met with in this process, so I got off to a great start there. I don't know that I can put a number on that. I can tell you how I went about the process at OPM. At the time, I was actually the acting director of the Office of Personnel Management.
Please do.
So I had to implement the President's executive order on Schedule F. And what we did is we asked our career chief human capital officer and our HR folks to look at the position descriptions to see which positions were policy making, policy influencing, confidential, or policy advocating positions.
And was that with a goal to getting to this 80% will be Schedule F?
No, that was my understanding. The 80% number, I'm not sure where that comes from, but I know, I think you may be referring to what happened at OMB, where OMB Director Vogt at the time did a similar analysis and came up with that number.
Was there a target number at OPM?
There was not. We just asked them to look at the position descriptions and let those speak for themselves.
How does Schedule PC differ from Schedule F?
Schedule PC, to my understanding, I think the major difference is that it provides for a competitive hiring process.
But folks can still be fired and not really have recourse to challenge a termination.
Yes, they would be.
And that's pretty important. Right now, I'll just say this and conclude. We see the administration firing probationary employees because probationary employees don't have the same access to challenge it.
Right.
What that means is it's a war on veterans because probationary employees are either brand new people, like right out of college, or career switchers. 30% of the federal workforce is veterans. They're career switchers. They tend to come in after serving 15 or 20 years, and they're probationary, even though they may be 45 or 50 years old. And that's why President Trump, in his first 6 weeks in office, has fired more veterans than any president in the history of the United States. And I think that's a disgrace, not a distinction. But I appreciate you sharing the difference between Schedule F and what Schedule PC is, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kaine. There's nothing to yield back, but I will accept it in any event. Thank you. Senator Scott.
Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses, congratulations for your nominations. There's a beautiful phrase in the New Testament in both the Gospels of Luke and Matthew that goes something like this: from the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. And Mr. Lohmeyer, I want to ask you about your very active mouth and what it reveals about your heart. Your tweeting. And I'll just give you a few examples. August 9, 2024, The left lies about nearly everything it does, and tens of millions of Americans believe the lies. So trashing the left and calling tens of millions of Americans dupes. August 2nd, 2024, if today you're wondering why the left and Mitt Romney seem to have entirely lost any semblance of a moral compass, Vladimir Lenin provides you the answer. April 1, 2023, of all that is good and decent, the left is the real oppressor. But the one I want to ask you about is the one that Senator Hirono asked you about, and she read you an excerpt. I'll read the whole thing. A tweet from August 9, 2024. Picked this up in my base exchange at Buckley Air Force Base several weeks after J6. This is what the Biden-Harris administration ushered in. After a government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol, they immediately demonized the men and women in uniform. Then they purged conservatives and Christians with their shot mandates. Brilliant planning, actually. Tell me what the phrase that you wrote, government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol, what does that mean with reference to January 6th?
Thanks for bringing this up again, Senator. I like the verses that you've read. I agree that it matters a great deal that we try and speak truthfully. I'll remind you respectfully that the comments that I made that you've just shared were shared on my X account, I presume. While I was a private citizen in this country in 2024, I'd been out of uniform for 3 years, and in fact, with absolutely no intention of returning to public service, I was quite enjoying private life and being able to criticize people as I wish.
So they were a sincere reflection of what you had in your heart at the time you wrote them.
In as much as those statements were properly contextualized, and I can't speak to the context from which you've read, I always do try and speak honestly, and again, reserve the right to be wrong about any of my views.
But how about just the phrase? What does, with respect to January 6th, what does your phrase, a government-led false flag and hoax at the Capitol, mean?
Let me share, too, that while I do recognize the other quotes that you've read, I don't recall having written those words that you just read about January 6th. And so that could be partly a memory problem. It could be that I retweeted something and that quote has been pulled, but I don't recall using that phrase. What I do believe is that private citizens in this country can have the right to express their views, as mean or as wrong as they might be, and that the men and women in uniform defend the right of the private citizen to speak those views, and that my concern while I was in uniform was, in fact, that the kind of partisan rhetoric that I had used, that you've just quoted from, for example, was actually being inserted into the military workplace in a way that divides troops. And so I was trying to hold our military cultural and workplace environment accountable to a standard of nonpartisanship, as I've indicated, so that we could thrive in unity and not division. Now, private citizens have the right to say those things.
I completely agree. Private citizens have the right to say and believe whatever they want. This is a hearing about your qualifications for the position. The qualifications are essentially, in my view, a mixture of three things: background, character, and judgment. It's about judgment. I don't want to confirm somebody into the Pentagon who would fall for a conspiracy theory that a fourth grader would find incredible. If I searched your social media and I saw you praising the Great Pumpkin over and over again, you would have the right to have that view, but I wouldn't want somebody who believed in the Great Pumpkin to be in the position that you're nominated for. And so if I'm thinking about people in the military, I know Virginia has an awful lot of people in the military. One of my kids is in the military. There are people in the military who are left, right, center, and maybe even more who are completely disinterested in politics, and we got to praise those. But how would somebody who's in the left or considers themselves in the left, serving in the Air Force, when you say the left lies about nearly everything it does, of all that is good and decent, the left is the real oppressor? How would any person who identifies that way feel any confidence that you as a leader would have their back?
Yes, Senator. I think it's a great question. It's one I actually share your concern for and care greatly about. Let me just share briefly in a 10-second answer that at the time that I departed from active duty, I had young men and women in uniform of all racial or ethnic backgrounds, certainly different political backgrounds, coming to me privately, sending me notes and saying, sir, I never knew what your political worldview was. I don't understand completely why you've chosen to now take a stand for these issues or write about what you did, but I respect you as a leader.
All right.
And if confirmed, I'd be happy to come
my
back.
time has run over, but I'll just, in yielding back to the chairman, I don't know where you were on January 6th. Most of us were here. A lot of us had a friend, a guy named Howie Liebengood, who was a Capitol police officer who died as a result of January 6th, whose widow, Serena, is one of my constituents. When I hear somebody, anybody, talk about what happened here as a false flag or a hoax, it is insulting to those of us who are here, and it's particularly insulting to those who lost loved ones that day. I yield back.
And the senator yields back her time. Now, Senator Kaine, I haven't asked my questions yet. Do you think I should?
I'm not in a rush,
no,
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead and ask your question, sir.
Well, thank you, and congratulations to the nominees. You're both very qualified. I look forward to supporting you. I want to begin actually just by putting some breaking news on the record. This morning, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, tweeted as follows: "This morning, I proudly ended the Women, Peace, and Security program inside the Department of Defense. WPS is yet another woke, divisive, social justice Biden initiative that overburdens our commanders and troops, distracting from our core task, warfighting. WPS is a United Nations program pushed by feminists and left-wing activists. Politicians fawn over it, troops hate it. DOD will hereby execute the minimum of WPS required by statute and fight to end the program for our next budget. Good riddance, WPS," close quote. I wanted to read this because that tweet contains some glaring inaccuracies that are far beneath the standard we should expect from a Department of Defense. First, WPS is yet another woke, divisive, social justice Biden initiative. WPS was passed by a unanimous vote in the Senate in October of 2017, when the Senate was majority Republican and Donald Trump was president, and he signed it. Does our Secretary of Defense not know the difference between a bill that was passed by the Biden administration and one that was passed and signed in the Trump administration? Secondly, politicians fawn over it, troops hate it. I return to the hearing this committee had to consider the confirmation of General Kaine. And I read the following testimony. Senator Shaheen, General Kaine, congratulations on your nomination. One of the things that we discussed was the Women, Peace, and Security legislation that was signed by President Trump during his first term. And it mandates that women should be at the table in conflict resolution and peace negotiations. And at DOD, that's meant having women involved in security cooperation programs that really give us, I think, an advantage over our adversaries like China and Russia. Just for the record, are you familiar with the WPS program, General Kaine? General Kaine, I am, Senator, yes. Senator Shaheen, and do you believe that it's a DEI program? General Kaine, I do not. Senator Shaheen, thank you. Can you provide some examples of the operational advantage that, from your perspective, this gives us? General Kaine, well, Senator, I can just give you my own personal recollections from being deployed. Before this was precursors of the program, but when we would go out into the field and after concluding an assault, we would have female members who would speak with those women and children who were on the objective, and they would help us to understand the human terrain in new and novel ways. And so WPS is, I think, a program that really helps us to understand the full spectrum of challenges that are in front of us. Close quote from the testimony of our confirmed chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. If the Secretary of Defense cannot understand the difference between a Biden initiative and a Trump administration, and when the Secretary of Defense claims that troops hate something that the newly confirmed head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff appreciates, I got to add this to the 1,000 questions about the judgment of this secretary that I've already raised. I'm stunned at the lack of professionalism that this tweet demonstrates. Look, we aired out pretty carefully at this hearing the Secretary's own antipathy to women in service and his own track record of poor treatment of women in leadership positions. The fact that he doesn't like WPS, that's one thing. But the fact that he claims that it's a Biden initiative when it isn't, an initiative that was supported unanimously by a Republican majority Senate, and that troops hate it when the newly confirmed head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff testifies to its value, I find shocking. Now I'll go to my questions, if I could. Admiral Papano, you were asked a question earlier about recruiting and hiring within NNSA, and you pointed out that you weren't, fully up to speed on the current. But I want to go back. The GAO did a report in May 2024 that I imagine you probably are aware of, and it discussed challenges that the NNSA faced in recruiting and retaining staff because of intense competition with other industries and other agencies. This is a skill set that's in pretty high demand. So should you be confirmed, how would you approach that challenge, making sure that we, keep the good talent we have and continue to attract new talent in an important place where there's a lot of competition in the private sector and the public sector too?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Yes, if confirmed, I will certainly advocate for the men and women of NNSA and the laboratories, understanding that there's a unique skill set critical to national security, everywhere from skilled trades up to weapons designers and nuclear physicists. And so it is sometimes hard to find those people, and we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to go attract, recruit, train, retain those people as part of national security. And that could start everywhere from looking at programs in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, K through 12, up to colleges, what opportunities we have out there to go get people interested in that line of work and develop them going forward.
I'm sure you probably have the tools you need to do that. But should you find that you don't, please let the committee know if there are additional tools we can provide to help you meet that mission.
Thank you, Senator. If confirmed, I look forward to working with the committee if I need additional tools.
I yield back, having taken the 38 seconds that Senator Warren undershot.
The gentleman has nothing to yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I want to ask you some questions about staff reduction and kind of the timing of it. You were confirmed by the Senate on February 13, so I'm sort of assuming that things happened before you were confirmed were other people's work. On January 28, the fork in the road letter came out to people across the federal employment space, widely attributed to OPM and Elon Musk and Doge. But that was before you were confirmed, so you had nothing to do with the fork in the road letter, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You were confirmed on February 13. On February 14, one day later, HHS announced that 3,500 probationary employees were going to be laid off. I know you're a hard worker, but am I right to assume that in the one day between your confirmation and the next day, you weren't the primary decision maker about laying off probationary employees at HHS?
I was aware of it, and I could have blocked it.
Yeah, you were aware of it, so you weren't the primary decision maker. Was that a decision that was made like OPM or Doge? And because it wasn't just HHS, it was all federal agencies who would lay off probationary. Do you know where that decision was?
I had my full upper staff in place before I got there.
Right, but did they make the decision, or was it White House and Doge to lay off probationary employees?
They made the decision. My staff made the decision,
Okay.
although Doge came in and Doge gave us information that we wouldn't otherwise have had access.
Okay. Next, we go to April 1st.
I can also say this.
No, all I asked was if you made it, and you answered the question, and I appreciate it. April 1, HHS RIFs 10,000 employees effective June 2. Now, by this point, you had been secretary for about 6 weeks. A few days after that announcement, HHS staff briefed our staff, the Senate help staff, and basically, just here's some highlights. In that 10,000 RIFs, 467 staff at the Administration for Children and Families, 2,473 at the Centers for Disease Control, 322 at CMS, 400 at HRSA, 1,312 at National Institutes of Health, 197 at SAMHSA, 2,519 at the Food and Drug Administration. By now, you've been secretary for 6 weeks, so this was RIFs, not the forks, but you were involved in the decision about these 10,000 RIFs, correct?
Yes.
And in tandem with your leadership team, correct?
Yes. Yes. And as I said before, I pushed back on certain ones and canceled certain ones.
Yeah. I think yesterday, it may have been earlier today, you confirmed that 20,000 employees have been let go, 10,000 at HHS, 10,000 RIFed and 10,000 forked. Do you know how many of the 20,000 were veterans?
No, I do not.
That is a fact that's very easy to determine from someone's personnel file. So I'm going to ask that question for the record. We are finding across the government that veterans are disproportionately being let go, A, because they're a higher percentage of the federal workforce, and B, they're a dramatically higher percentage of probationary employees because they leave military service after 10 or 25 years, and then they're probationary new employees when they join the civilian service. So I want to find the answer to that question. Where does the rubber meet the road on 20,000 RIFs and layoffs and forks? In people not getting cancer trials, and I appreciate your willingness to help Senator Murray's constituent, in state grants being canceled, in Virginia losing $425 million in funding to the Virginia Department of Health. But here's a small example. All of our offices do casework. All of them do casework. And we get requests from constituents all the time. CMS is the largest agency in the federal government. Its budget is nearly twice the size of the Pentagon. And people who depend on Medicaid, Medicare, and the SCHIP program really, really depend on it. And it's the most consistent in the top 3 or 4 in terms of constituent requests to my office. Answer this question about Medicare or Medicaid or the SCHIP program. In every administration I've served with, Obama, Trump 1, Biden, I get answers to questions on behalf of constituents. I may not get them as fast as I like, and sometimes I like the answer and sometimes I don't. But let me show you what CMS is now doing to answer constituent questions. I've omitted the name of the constituent, and I've omitted the name of my staffer. This was very recent. A hardworking retiree, patriotic tax-paying American who's on Medicare wrote to ask CMS a very simple question about Medicare. Couldn't get an answer. Asked us to reach out. We reached out to the Medicare Part C and D Congressional Liaison Office. And here was their answer to our basic question. Unfortunately, there is not an update to provide. With the recent change of administration, we are unable to provide any information related on matters related to Mr. X's request, Congressional Casework Team. I mean, if you're just an everyday, hardworking American retiree on Medicare, and you have a basic question about it, you ought to be able to get an answer. And I'm just going to say, I've shared this with my colleagues, and many of us are having the same experience where our constituents can't get a basic question answered. I wonder if 20,000 fewer employees is connected to this. I yield back, Mr. Chair. Okay, Mr. Kaine. Thank you to the witnesses. I'm just going to pick up on Senator Murphy's questions or line of questions about the Qataris' offer of the plane, and it's not really a question for you, but it's really a message. If folks from Qatar are watching this, you've made a grievous mistake by putting this offer on the table. If the offer had been, because of delays in producing the next version of Air Force One, we have a jet that we will make available to whoever the U.S. president is until that next aircraft is complete, it would have raised a series of questions for the committee. Is this an aircraft that can be used consistent with security protocols for the president? Can it be adequately defended? Needs it be updated? How much is the update going to cost? There would have been some questions about whether this was trying to curry favor with the Trump administration, but if it had been an even-handed offer, as long as there's a delay, here is something that the U.S. can use until the next iteration of Air Force One is complete, we could have had a debate about the details. But the notion that, and oh, by the way, it's for President Trump, and when you are done in office, this is for you to take to the presidential library and use however you want. Qatar is badly damaging any reputation you have for credibility on the Hill by making that offer. Now, I read yesterday a story that said that on the Qatari side, the offer is still under consideration. I would urge you in the strongest possible terms to change the offer to make sure that it is not an offer to a particular individual like President Trump. Because by doing that, you will lead us to question your motivations for a very long time. You will damage the reputation. And let's be honest, Qatar has done a number of things that the U.S. has viewed as positive in terms of trying to help facilitate hostage release in Gaza. But Qatar has also done a number of things that cause members of this committee, based on previous statements, grave concern, including harboring Hamas leaders in Qatar. So I'm not going to try to give President Trump advice because he's not going to follow my advice. But if Qatar wants a long-term relationship with all branches of the United States government, you are about to commit a grievous error that is likely to be a permanent stain on your ethical record, and you should reconsider it. Second, Mr. Pratt, you were asked a question earlier, and maybe in a back and forth with Senator Risch, you talked about how ITAR is going to be one of your big headaches should you be confirmed. I would just encourage you, Senator Shaheen and I were just in a really, I think, instructive armed services hearing about foreign military sales and ITAR, and the witnesses were independent witnesses. They have experience at the Pentagon, but they were coming at it from the DOD side and talking about frustrations on the DOD side with the ITAR process. And I would just urge you and your team to take a look at that testimony in that hearing, because I think there's some good ideas in it that would help you solve this thing that I know is going to be a headache for you, but I appreciate your making it a priority. And then just a question really either for Mr. Pratt, or maybe I'll go to Mr. DeSambre first, which is about AUKUS. I'm a big supporter of AUKUS. I think the US, UK, Australia framework, Pillar 1 around sub-production, Pillar 2 open-ended, and it is something that can include other nations. If the Big Ten can have 16 teams, well, AUKUS can have more nations than the US, Australia, and the UK. Talk a little bit about the value that you see in AUKUS, and should you be confirmed, how you would want to make sure that we harvest the upside of that arrangement.
Senator, thank you very much for that question, and thank you for making the opportunity of your staff to meet with me. I greatly appreciated that. Obviously, this year we're celebrating the 74th anniversary of our ANZUS treaty with Australia, so it's been one of our longest allies in the region, and AUKUS really gives us an opportunity to increase the strength of that relationship and what we can do in the region. Obviously, Pillar 1 with the conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine, but Pillar 2 with regard to defense technology and co-production, potentially co-development as well, could be very valuable. And my understanding, that the administration is committed to AUKUS, and I believe it's a very important part of our Indo-Pacific strategy in a way to, as I indicated with one of my priorities, work with our allies and partners to enhance deterrence and counter malign activities of our adversaries.
I appreciate that. Look forward to working with you on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colonel Rayburn.
Thank you. Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In response to an earlier question, you sort of posed a question back. What is one thing that has happened during the Trump administration that has strengthened Vladimir Putin's hand in Ukraine, mentioning that the sanctions were still in place? I just would like to introduce for the record an article dated February 28 from NBC News titled, "State Department Terminates U.S. Support of Ukraine Energy Grid Restoration."
That'll be entered in the record.
I was in Ukraine the day after the Palm Sunday bombing in Sumy and spoke to USAID staffers who'd all been riffed. They're going to be laid off either in the middle of the summer or early September. I'm aware that that's subject to litigation, but they talked about the fact that the grant cancellation canceled a grant that USAID had in place, hundreds of millions of dollars, that has been used repeatedly to restore the Ukrainian energy grid after attacks by Russians. I could give other examples. That is the one that is most present on my mind since I was just there. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you about the program. It's the United States Refugee Assistance Program, and this is a program that state is the manager of, but together with other cabinet secretariats, DHS and HHS. State plays the lead management role, and it is how to manage the U.S. refugee assistance programs in tandem with contractors who help the United States on that. By an executive order on the first day of his presidency, President Trump paused all refugee programs and has canceled contracts to the agencies like the U.S. Catholic Church or Lutheran Refugee Services or HIAS or Church World Services who've been resettling refugees. Those programs are paused. There's litigation about it, but as far as I know, the United States is not, or the administration has not withdrawn the executive order. So there's essentially from this administration no refugee programs for anyone except. In early February, the president announced a special refugee program for Afrikaner farmers, justified A, by some concerns about South Africa and foreign policy, but B, a claim that these were persecuted individuals. So right now, the U.S. Refugee Program allows a special program for Afrikaner farmers, the first group of whom arrived at Dulles Airport in Virginia not long ago, while shutting off the refugee program for everyone else. Do you think Afrikaner farmers are the most persecuted group in the world?
I think those 49 people that came certainly felt they were persecuted, and they've passed every sort of check mark that had to be checked off in terms of meeting the requirements for that. They live in a country where farms are taken and land is taken on a racial basis.
Okay. Do you think they're more persecuted than Uyghurs or Rohingyas, or more persecuted than political dissidents in Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua, or more persecuted than those who would be threatened should they be returned to Afghanistan by violence by the Taliban?
Well, the problem we face there is the volume problem, okay? If you look at all the persecuted people of the world, it's millions of people. They can't all come here. And we had refugee programs.
So why prioritize Afrikaner farmers?
Well, because it's a small subset, it's a new issue, and the president identified it as a problem and wanted to use it as an example. But that's different from having these refugee programs that were basically spending money to put people up in communities and accommodate them, and it was acting as a magnet. Millions of people entered this country illegally, and today the border is sealed.
Let me challenge you, and I'm just going to say for the public, if you want to understand about the, quote, persecution of Afrikaner farmers, go look at the composition of the South African government. Since July of 2024, there's a government of national unity, and the opposition party to the ANC, the Afrikaner Party, the Democracy Alliance, is part of the governing coalition. They joined the governing coalition a year ago, and the leader of that party was given the remit of Agriculture Minister, John Steenhuisen. He is the leader of the former Afrikaner Party, still widely representing Afrikaners. He is the Minister of Agriculture in South Africa right now. I assert that this claim that there's persecution of Afrikaner farmers is completely specious. Are you aware ever during the apartheid era in South Africa did the United States establish a special program to allow South African blacks who were treated as second-class citizens in the apartheid program, a special program so they could claim refugee status in the United States?
No, because I was probably in 9th grade or 8th grade at the time.
Yeah, well, then I don't expect you to know. I'll just tell you, never has there been a program, a special program for Africans to come in as refugees to the United States. We've allowed special programs for people being persecuted for their religion, Soviet-era Jews. We've allowed special programs for people fleeing from communism, Cuba, Vietnam, the Soviet Union. We've never allowed a special program to allow Africans into the United States in an expedited refugee status until now. Afrikaner farmers living in a nation governed by a government of national unity that includes the main Afrikaner Party. And actually, an even more right-wing Afrikaner Party is also included in the coalition government. Now, would you agree with me, Mr. Secretary, that if we're interpreting the statutory phrase, a well-justified fear of persecution, we should try to do that in an even-handed way?
I think we should try to do that in the interest of the national security of the United States.
So okay, I agree with you too. We should. Should we try to do it in an even-handed way? So, for example, should we say, if you're persecuted on the grounds of your religion, we'll let you in if you're a Christian, but not if you're a Muslim?
I think that the United States has a right to allow into this country and prioritize allowance of who they want to allow to come in. But I think there's
but I'm going to ask you, what? So a well-justified fear of persecution?
Yeah, they thought that their farms were being burned down and they would be killed. I think that's a pretty good justification for wanting to come. They're afraid for their lives.
And should it be applied in an even-handed way? That's an easy.
No, our foreign policy doesn't require even-handedness. It requires prioritizing the interests of the United States.
The statutory phrase says you are entitled to entrance as a refugee if you demonstrate a well-justified fear of persecution.
No, you're not entitled.
So
you're
can
allowed.
You have a different standard based upon the color of somebody's skin? Would that be acceptable?
Well, I'm not the one arguing that. Apparently you are, because you don't like the fact that they're white, and that's why they're coming.
I'm just asking you to say that would be unacceptable.
Well, no, I would say that the United States...
a very easy thing to say.
The United States has a right to pick and choose who they allow into the United States.
Even based on the color of somebody's skin.
You're the one that's talking about the color of their skin, not me. These are people whose farms were being burned down and they were killed because of the color of their skin.
Well, I'm...
Well, you've demonstrated enough because you think anyone should be allowed into this country for any reason because they met a certain
Who
criteria.
has said that?
We are going to prioritize people that come into our country on the basis of what's in the interest of this country. That's a small number of people that are coming.
But
in
you
that
said
particular
you said
case.
this weekend that
but
there
in
would
other
be more.
cases, it's harder to vet. In other cases, it's more difficult. And by the way, the United States admits people every year. 1 million people come to this country every year legally. 1 million
And
people
now
a year come to this
there
country
is
legally.
one group
No
of
other
people
country
that
in the
have
world
an
is nearly as
easy
generous.
pass into this country. For the first time, this administration has said Afrikaners get an easy pass and refugee programs for the remainder of the world are shut off. And you can't say to the American public that we should apply this statute in an even-handed way.
No, I
I'm
think it should
shocked
be
at that,
applied in a
and I
way.
yield
No, you
back.
shouldn't be shocked. It should be applied in the national interest of the United States. Our immigration policy should be based on the national interest of the United States. Period. End of story. If there is a subset of people that are easier to vet, who we have a better understanding of who they are and what they're going to do when they come here, they're going to receive preference, no doubt about it. There are a lot of sad stories around the world. Millions and millions of people around the world. It's heartbreaking. We cannot assume millions and millions of people around the world. No country can. So you have to have a process of deciding who do you prioritize, who do you allow in. We do it all the time. We do it in our immigration system now under our current laws. Unfortunately, it's primarily based on family connection and not on what they're going to contribute to the society from a merit standpoint. That should be changed, but that'll require statutory changes. But the bottom line is this notion that somehow we have to accept anyone who wants to come to the United States is absurd. No country in the world has an immigration policy like that.
And no one is arguing that we should. I yield back, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, earlier this month, you announced a plan to change the name of 3 Virginia military bases to restore the names of Confederate-era generals on those bases. You researched to find brave American soldiers with the same last names, Lee, Hill, and Pickett, who had not fought for the Confederacy and declared that those Confederate adjacent names would be restored. The problem is that you had to strip away the names of 4 amazing people that the Pentagon and local communities had chosen to honor at the Virginia bases. Van Barfoot, he was a Mississippi native, Mr. Chair, who came to Fort Pickett in the early 40s to train for war. He fought all over Europe in World War II. He won the Congressional Medal of Honor for his bravery. Leading his platoon in southern Italy, he killed 10 of the enemy, captured 17 more, and escorted 2 wounded Americans 1,700 yards to safety under enemy fire. Stayed in the Army for another 34 years, seeing action in both the Korean and the Vietnam Wars, and being assigned as the Army liaison to the Virginia National Guard at Fort Pickett. Long after he retired, he maintained his tie to the fort and to the Virginia National Guard. I was at the naming ceremony, where this base, to which he had devoted much of his life, was named in his honor. His family was there, and they were so proud. Arthur Gregg served in the Army for more than 30 years, first African-American to reach the rank of brigadier general, first to reach the rank of lieutenant general, began as an enlisted, eventually decided to become a commissioned officer, went to Fort Lee for quartermaster training, quickly rose through the ranks as an instructor, even though he was not allowed to go to the officers' club because of the color of his skin. He finished his career in 1979 as the director of all Army logistics operations around the world. He stayed near Fort Lee in retirement, raised his family there, and was a continuous beloved presence until his death last summer at 96. He was actually at the renaming ceremony with his family in 2022 at this place that meant so much to him. Charity Adams. Charity Adams was an Army officer during World War II, the first African-American woman allowed to join the WACs. She was the commanding officer of the 6888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, a unique battalion composed primarily of African-American women making sure that American GIs in Europe got their mail during World War II. Our colleagues Jackie Rosen and Jerry Moran successfully passed a bill in 2022 giving the 6888 the Congressional Gold Medal. Charity Adams was the highest-ranking African-American woman in the military at the end of World War II. Her family was at the dedication of Fort Gregg Adams, named in honor of these 2 trailblazing logistics leaders. They were so proud. Finally, Mary Walker, the only woman ever to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. She graduated from Syracuse Medical School in 1855. She tried to join the Union Army as a surgeon, was turned away because she was a woman. But the need was so great, she eventually got hired at a military hospital in Washington and then was deployed as an Army surgeon with the Army of the Cumberland and the 52nd Ohio Infantry, becoming the first female surgeon in the U.S. Army. She served all over Virginia, including the place where the base is now named after her. She frequently crossed battle lines to treat civilians and even treated Confederate soldiers. She was captured a prisoner of war in Richmond until a prisoner relief president, Andrew Johnson, gave her the Congressional Medal of Honor after the Civil War. Why did you decide that these 4 patriots were not worthy enough to have their names on a base?
Well, Senator, as you know, this was never about the names of the bases they were renamed to.
So you don't challenge the worthiness?
Restoring all bases to their original
to the
name,
Confederate
because we're not
names.
about erasing
Okay,
history.
you don't care about their military record. You wanted to restore the Confederate names. When you called the Gregg family to tell them that their dad's name was no longer going to be on the base, what was their reaction?
Senator, the Army notified them of that.
You didn't call any of the families, and I've spoken with the families, and the families were called by the press. That's how they learned about this. They learned about it from the press. You didn't call the Barfoot family, the Gregg family, and you didn't call the Adams family. I told the families I'd ask you about this today. In fact, 2 of General Gregg's granddaughters, Avery and Sydney, are right here in the audience, and I want to ask you this as I close. While you announced that these brave men and women's names would be stripped from the Virginia bases, no orders to that effect have been received by the base commanders. In light of the patriotic service of Van Barfoot, Arthur Gregg, Charity Adams, and Mary Walker, I'd like to ask you simply not to issue the orders changing the names of these Virginia bases. These families, my Commonwealth, are very proud of these heroes, very satisfied with these names, and ask you not to change them. Will you honor these exemplary patriots and keep their worthy names in places on the bases they loved and where they served?
Well, Senator, we very much thank and appreciate them for their service, and we'll find ways to recognize them, but the orders will soon be going to those bases to change the names back to the original name that never should have been changed.
But you have the power to not send those orders. They haven't gone out yet, correct?
Thank you. Senator, your time has expired.
Kaine, I guess you made the deal. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Regas, good to see you again. Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce into the record an article from Reuters dated May 16, 2025, titled, "Exclusive U.S. Aid Cuts Leave Food for Millions Moldering in Storage."
It will be entered in the record.
Let me just read some excerpts from this article that came out 2 months ago today. Food rations that could supply 3.5 million people for a month are moldering in warehouses around the world because of U.S. aid cuts and risk becoming unstable. The food stocks have been stuck inside 4 U.S. government warehouses since the Trump administration's decision in January to cut global aid programs. A spokesperson for the State Department, which oversees USAID, said in response to detailed questions about the food stocks that it was working to ensure the uninterrupted continuation of aid programs and their transfer by July as part of the USAID decommissioning process. Quote, USAID is continuously consulting with partners on where to best distribute commodities at USAID warehouses. A proposal to hand the stocks to aid organizations is on hold. Finally, nearly 500 tons of high-energy biscuits stored at a USAID warehouse in Dubai are due to expire in July, according to a former USAID official. The biscuits could feed at least 27,000 acutely malnourished children for a month. The biscuits are now likely to be destroyed or turned into animal feed. That article was from 2 months ago. Yesterday, The Atlantic reported that the expiration date on those 500 tons of nutritious food for starving kids was now upon us, and the U.S. had decided to incinerate that food rather than allow starving children to have it. Mr. Regas, you're the Deputy Secretary for Management and Resources. These are resources that were purchased with U.S. taxpayer dollars. They're specifically designed to save the lives of starving children. Why is it a good use of resources to not distribute that food to kids and instead burn it?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I'd have to look into that particular issue and see how those foodstuffs got there and why they were.
Can I just interrupt for a second? I asked this question at a hearing yesterday, so you would be prepared to know that I would ask it today. And we called your office to tell you that I would ask it today. So the notion that you need to look into it strikes me as a little bit odd. As you sit here today, is that food being distributed to kids or is it being incinerated?
If it's been expired, my understanding is it's the policy of the government to not distribute expired food or medicine.
Then given that this has been written about for months, and the article in March that I introduced in the record was not the first. We've been asking Secretary Rubio about this back into March. Since it has been known for months that this food would have an expiration date, why has the State Department decided to burn it rather than distribute it to starving children?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that question, Senator. I am as distressed about that as you are.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, does that kind of make you feel ashamed? Are you proud of it, or are you indifferent to it?
Look, I don't think it's, I'm not going to say I'm ashamed or proud or indifferent to it, but I think that was a failure.
How about this, just as a statement of proposition? If the U.S. uses taxpayer dollars to buy specialty foods for starving children, I think it's better that the food be distributed to starving children rather than incinerated. You would agree with me?
I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think this was just a casualty of the
I have a hard time. I view it as an intentional thing, because if we suddenly woke up in July, oh gosh, the expiration date is today.
Yeah.
That would be one thing. But in March, there was a request by the World Food Program and others, look, if you're not going to distribute it, maybe you've decided, the U.S., that starving kids are no longer your thing. Yeah. But you have this asset. If you're not going to distribute it, we'll distribute it.
Yeah.
So it's not a mistake if you've been on notice of it for 2 months and you've made the decision to keep the warehouse locked and allow this food to be destroyed, rather than, again, I think the article says this would feed at least 27,000 acutely malnourished children for a month. I mean, so is this incompetence or cruelty or both?
I'd have to look into what the facts of the matter were. If there were another aid organization that was asking to have access to that, to deliver it.
Well, yeah, I want you to look into it. I really hoped you'd come to me today and say, having been put on notice, I was going to ask this. We're going to give the food to kids. Yeah. Hey, you went to Boston University. Who is the most famous BU alum?
The most famous BU alum?
Next to you.
I don't know. I don't want to offend anyone that's graduated from BU. But
I'll tell you who it is.
Okay.
Martin Luther King Jr. Yeah. What do you think Martin Luther King Jr. would say about a nation that purchased food for starving kids and then locked it in a warehouse until it expired and incinerated it, rather than giving it out so that 27,000 starving kids could survive meagerly for 1 more month?
Well, we're still the biggest giver of aid anywhere in the world by far. So I think, look,
I'll just conclude. Yeah. I want to hand it back to you, Mr. Chair. A lot of complicated issues. Sometimes the tiniest detail really exposes the soul. We had a big bill that increased the deficit by $3 trillion and big tax breaks and cut SNAP and all of that. But a government that is put on notice, here are resources that will save 27,000 starving kids. Can you please distribute them or give them to someone who can, who decides, no, we would rather keep the warehouse locked, let the food expire, and then burn it. To me, that really exposes the soul of this endeavor. And I am glad to hear you at least say that my questions cause you some concern.
I certainly did say that. I'll say it again. And look, this is a media account, so I'd want to look into, like, I have to, forgive me if I don't always take everything that's reported in the media to be 100% factual, but I do want to find out what happened here and get to the ground truth.
Thank you.
And if that's what happened. Thank you.